Hello again, whiskey friends. Thanks for joining me today for another episode. And if this is your first time here, hey, why don't you check it out, see if you like the vibe? Maybe we could become whiskey friends long term. But for today, we're going to do a whiskey discussion. I just like having these, get questions on Instagram, get questions in chat, get questions on comments, and just like to give video responses this way to get some other dialogue started. But the question that I got last week was, Jeff, how do you get your bottles? When you're doing these reviews, you're doing things on some bottles that I've never heard of. Like, where are you getting these things? So I just wanted to break it down, go through how I'm acquiring my bottles. Maybe this gives you a few tips and tricks. And I think it's going to demystify it a little bit too, because I'm not doing anything special. So thanks for joining, everybody. Let's kick off the show. All right. Cheers, whiskey friends. Now, as we go through this, I'm going to go through 5 different strategies that I've used to acquire most of my bottles. But the thing to keep in mind is like when we're going through some of these strategies have expired. They don't work anymore. There was a time and place that they did work, but they stopped working. And that's when you just got to move on. You got to have multiple tools in your toolbox so that you can, keep keep working on things. So the first one I'm going to talk about, A, my area here is in Cincinnati, Ohio. So with the Ohio stores, we live in a control state here. So most of the inventory store to store is the same. And you got to keep that in mind for anywhere that anyone lives. When you talk about how are you getting your bottles, man, location, location, location is what matters so much. But for the most part, with Ohio stores, I don't go into the line. I don't wait for things to open. I don't have enough time to play that game. Family commitments, wife might kill me. I just don't go out there at 7 a.m. standing in line waiting to get a drop. Now, if you know the system, there's a lot of good things that you can get if you're playing that game. So, no, not knocking anybody that plays that game, but I just can't do it. But I can randomly walk into a grocery store when I'm trying to get, food for the kids, see if they got something. And a lot of the time, since I'm in Ohio, it'll be a Weller Green label. And then I go and I give it to my mother-in-law. But that's essentially how I play the game in Ohio. They just randomly do things. And I tend to notice, okay, if they have Stag Junior drop that day, yeah, everyone's going to claim the Stag Juniors. But there are some brands that I'm into that will linger because, A, they don't have any secondary value and they don't have any hype around them. And then all of a sudden I'll walk in and be like, hey, you got a Penelope Architect there? Sure, I'll take that. Why not? So there are some things that just randomly drop in Ohio and you just get lucky. It just happen to show up on the right day. Strategy number 2 for me is actually Northern Kentucky. Being so close to the border, I do get to play a little bit within the Kentucky game and sometimes Indiana, but I don't go to the Indiana side too often. But there's essentially a loop of Kentucky stores that I will just hit. I can do that during my lunch break, let's say, go around in a loop, hit 2 or 3 stores. Some days they have stuff, some days they don't. Just take it for what it is. They either have it that day or they don't have it. And then once again, some of these stores just do random drops like the party source. So you never know what's going to be in the case any given day. So I don't know. You get lucky. So notice a key characteristic of the first 2 strategies: pure luck. You just got to play it enough times and you get lucky. Now, before I go on to the next one, the one thing I don't have when it comes to the physical store locations, I don't have any special relationships with any store owners or the guy in the back or the guy that gives me a text, the guy that gives me a call. I got none of that. It's just luck. I'm just playing a luck game. I could establish some relationships, I guess, but I don't know. I'm not really the best at that when it comes to going into a store and just chatting people up. I just go in the store, look what's on the shelf, and say, okay, nothing. And then I walk out. The third way I get bottles is online retailers. And I think people maybe are sleeping on these a little bit. There's a few examples. Sealbach is probably the most prominent one, but they can ship to like, geez, 40 to 48 states. There's some number up there, and they ship to Ohio too. So I do get a lot of bottles from them. An example of that would be like Discovery 9 that I just got. That's not dropping anywhere around here recently. They still have lots of Discovery 8. I wanted a Discovery 9. I wanted to compare it. I wanted to do the review. So I went to an online retailer and I ordered it that way. Now, the downside of the online retailer is, of course, going to be the shipping costs. So now you're adding 15 to 20 bucks to any given bottle, especially if you're only buying one. So there are downsides to these strategies, but a lot of the bottles behind me came from online retailers. Now, I'm not talking about Buffalo Trace products. I'm not talking about EH Taylor and Eagle Rare and those type of things. I'm not paying up for that, but I'm talking about the things that you see behind me. A lot of the MGPs, the Four Gates, the Backbones, not the Pingree because that's been gone for quite a while, but you get the gist. So online retailers are a good source, especially if you're not chasing just the most popular allocated brands. The next one I think is probably the most underrated way to get bottles. And if you are not doing this, this is probably the one I suggest the most. But so many of my whiskeys are now group picks. And those picks are either coming from local groups or more national groups. But I treat these just like they're essentially social clubs. Some of them even have fees and dues to get in, to get higher priority. You know, you got to pick your punches on that and see where you want to invest your money and whose palate you trust and who you're going to consistently get things from. But ultimately, it's like joining a social club and then you get the rights to those picks. And some of those group picks, man, the last 2 to 3 years, I'd put them up against nearly anything that is allocated. You know, if I could just do my top 5 bourbons and just keep them to some of the single barrels that I get, I would do that. Now, that's not fair, and that doesn't make any for getting good content here. So typically, I only put single barrels into any type of list if I have multiple examples of a brand that has a great single barrel. But a lot of times, these picks, we don't even talk about them because they're just so, I mean, there's only 150 to 200 of them in existence, but within that group, there is a tight knit, there's a community, and then all of those stickers, there ends up being a story behind them and a feeling behind them, and they're essentially album covers that commemorate the moment. That, I think, is the absolute best way to get whiskey right now. So if you're not in any groups, man, try to find some local groups. If there are no local groups in your area, try to start one. Figure out what the laws are, figure out what the rules are. But maybe you can get something going and get these picks going yourself. Then the fifth one and the last one, and this one should be quite obvious. It's Whiskey Friends. Of course, it's Whiskey Friends. You know, you have friends everywhere and they see different things. They play by different rules and maybe they can pick up two things and then they give you one of them. And then you do the same thing for them and help them out with whatever you can get lucky on. And you just reciprocate that over and over and over and over again and build those relationships up, and that's the best way to do it. And then you have the stories about the bottles and you're sharing the bottles and you're having fun talking about the bottles because you both know you have the bottle. That's the fun part of all of it, building the community around it. So once again, of course it's whiskey friends. You can't be everywhere at once, but if you have a network of whiskey friends, man, they can really help you out and do a lot of the lifting as a group rather than as an individual. So hopefully that kind of illuminates a little bit how I get my bottles. I mean, it's nothing special. It's not anything anybody else can do. I know some of the laws are different, especially if we start talking about different countries and our Canadian friends who can't even get their own product over there. Uh, Things get complicated depending on the area, and I recognize that. But just wanted to throw it out there. When you look at the shelf behind me, there is no special relationship that's getting me these. I'm just showing up to stores enough times to get lucky. Well, that'll do for today's whiskey discussion. Let me know in the comments, what is your primary way to get bottles? Is it through pure luck? Is it through relationships? How do you play this game? I'm very curious. Well, till next time, I'll catch you later, whiskey friends. Bye, everybody.